The events begin in the night city of Seoul. Siang Company had one of the tallest headquarters in the city. The company's annual sales were close to 3.1 trillion won, and its operating profit alone reached 302 trillion won. Automobiles, electronics, telecommunications, heavy and chemical industries, distribution, fashion products. In all of these industries, the company performed exceptionally well. They were even honored on stage as the Company of the Year. The protagonist came from a rural area and graduated from a local university. When he received his acceptance notification from Siang, villagers hung congratulatory posters on trees. His father invited relatives to a small party. Everyone celebrated. Soon he stood near the door marked Strategic Planning Headquarters, but reality struck. He was only a cleaner at a construction site. These were the people who beat and killed anyone the company no longer wanted. While this happened, their leader simply watched from the sidelines. The protagonist performed a tedious and horrifying job, looking at his boss smoking a cigarette. Still, he did not give up. At night, he studied English and reviewed countless business plans. Patiently, he gave everything he had. At some point, the aristocrats of the Sang family began to recognize the name Young Hang. Legal or illegal, they came to the protagonist. After 13 years, he became far more serious than before. No one knew the hidden truth of this aristocratic family better than him. The events move to an airport just after a plane has taken off. Yongan walked through the terminal, dragging a suitcase on wheels. The airport was quiet, with few people around. He was the one Sang trusted enough to deposit $700 million into his account. Heading toward the exit, bright sunlight filled the sky. Yan shaded his eyes with his hand, frowning as unpleasant memories surfaced. Recently, he had stood before his boss and asked how he could calmly deposit such an amount into his account. His boss first looked at him silently, then smiled. He said he did not even trust his wife, but Yongan was the exception, the only one he trusted with his money. Yun's eyes widened in shock. Returning to the present, Yongan smiled faintly and closed his eyes. He took his sunglasses from his inner pocket and adjusted them. Having earned the trust of the Sang family, he believed his life was just beginning. Suddenly, two men called out to him and approached. Dressed in black suits, they told him the road ahead was long. A bead of sweat ran down Yun Hun's face. His eyes, hidden behind the glasses, widened in shock when he realized they were from the Secretariat. Removing his glasses, he asked why they were there. The brown-haired man replied that the president had instructed them to assist him. Yungan frowned. His visit was supposed to be secret. Suddenly, horror filled him. He turned and saw a gun muzzle aimed at his back. The man behind him calmly told him to follow quietly. The brown-haired man urged him to come along. The protagonist clenched his teeth, realizing their intention. They planned to eliminate him. As the car drove along a forest road, Yongan regretted the 13 years he had spent loyally serving Siang. The driver focused on the road while his companion rested a fist on his jaw, observing the surroundings. Anger burned inside Yongan. He asked them to call the president and let him speak, but they refused, telling him to stop dreaming. Desperate, Yongan shouted, promising silence. He said he would flee to South America or Eastern Europe and never show his face again. The driver silenced him, reminding him of his wife and parents. Horror washed over him. Then the man beside him claimed the president had ordered financial support for his parents and promised to send his wife to America. Yongan's lips trembled. He knew it was all a lie. Once they killed him and erased the evidence, his family would receive nothing. They would not even give him severance pay. The company would confiscate everything, leaving not a single penny behind. The car continued into the forest until it stopped in a small clearing. The protagonist stepped out and looked around. Two men followed him. He noticed a lake whose name he did not know. This lake would become his grave. He tried to say his final words but froze when a man raised a gun. A gunshot rang out. Birds scattered into the air. At that moment, A strange energy transferred the protagonist's soul into a small boy sitting in a car seat. His eyes widened in horror. 3 months had passed since he awakened in this body, yet the nightmare of his past life never left him. His mother turned and asked if he was okay. She was an actress who became famous from a single film. The driver was his father, once her fan, later her husband. His older brother, seated beside him, teased him for suddenly waking up. Jun raised his hand, saying he was just surprised. His mother smiled faintly, saying he had grown up so suddenly that it confused her. Looking out the window, Jun realized today marked exactly 30 years before his death. 3 months had passed since he awoke as Jun, the youngest grandson of the founder Yao, a man surrounded by legends. He had been reborn as the 10-year-old grandson of the family that once ordered his execution on a secluded lakeshore. As the white car approached the mansion guarded by security, Jun stared in awe. The estate consisted of 3 massive buildings, covering over 35,000 square meters. Guards saluted his father and allowed them inside. Jun remembered this place well. This was where he once pulled weeds during his first job after joining the company. Today, it was Yao's birthday. A crowd gathered near the estate, chatting and celebrating. They were talking among themselves and having fun, like it was a billionaire version of a backyard barbecue. Jun, accompanied by his family, approached the crowd. Some people turned to look at them while others began whispering with clear dissatisfaction, the kind of side-eye you see in rich family dramas. Jun watched silently, understanding exactly what was happening. As his family moved through the crowd, he scanned the faces, then slowly stopped. It became obvious. Everyone was deliberately ignoring them. No explanation was needed. This was Game of Thrones, Corporate Edition. Soon, they climbed the stairs and stood before the front door of the estate. Once inside, Jun's father turned his head and announced their arrival. Instantly, every man and woman looked their way. The uncles and aunts from his father's brother's side stared with open contempt, one uncle even sneering that they had finally decided to show up. The relatives from his father's sister's side stayed silent, staring arrogantly, like royalty judging peasants who wandered into the wrong hall. One of his father's brothers smiled faintly as he observed them. Jun studied his new relatives carefully, his expression calm but alert. Suddenly, the aunt snapped, loudly questioning Yoongi about why he was late and whether his wild youth habits still lingered. Jun raised one eyebrow, genuinely unsure who she even was. Yoongi apologized calmly, showing zero emotion. The aunt rested her head on her hand irritably, muttering that it still annoyed her. Jun suddenly pictured an elderly blonde woman with a permanent smile. Though already 70, she constantly paraded young lovers like a Netflix scandal documentary. Jun covered his mouth to hide a smile, remembering her terrifying personality. The aunt noticed and frowned, demanding to know if he was laughing. Immediately, the uncle and his wife caught on. The uncle's smile vanished, replaced by pure contempt toward Yoongi. Other relatives joined in, staring at Jun's family like they didn't belong. Jun lowered his hand calmly and said he was not laughing. The aunt exploded, jumping up and screaming, but her older brother cut her off, teeth clenched, asking why she chose this exact moment to start drama. She screamed back, insisting the child had laughed. Then a voice cut through the chaos like a Marvel villain entering the room. Their father demanded to know who dared to raise their voice in his house. Instantly, the arguing siblings bowed their heads. As Yao descended the stairs one step at a time, fear spread through the room. Yoongi and his wife bowed deeply. With every step, another family member lowered their gaze, like dominoes falling. Only Yoongi, his wife, and Jun remained relatively composed, though they still bowed. Sweat rolled down Jun's face as he looked at his grandfather, a living legend of the company. Everyone stood and bowed deeply. Even the eldest brother's face twitched, veins bulging, terrified of losing his inheritance. The middle son trembled, imagining a future where he inherited nothing. The youngest feared losing his elite lifestyle. The daughter understood all of this and quietly looked away. Finally, Yang Qiao reached the bottom of the stairs. White-haired and tense, he carried the presence of a man once called the Iron-Hearted Devil. He glared at his children. Only Jun looked at his new grandfather with excitement, like a chess player seeing the board for the first time. Bangyo bowed deeply and announced their arrival. Yao looked at her, and the tension on his face eased. Dano's eldest son trembled and hid behind his mother. Yao glared at him, and Jun's eyes widened as he realized his brother had already been in their mother's womb at the time of the wedding. That was why the grandfather couldn't fully oppose it. Suddenly, his brother's fear made sense. Jun steadied himself and stared directly at his grandfather. Their eyes locked. Yao's gaze sharpened, trying to intimidate him. Jun shuddered, sweat dripping down his face, yet he didn't look away. Then Yao smiled. He asked why they visited so rarely, even though he always called them. Jun froze. Yao stepped forward, patted his head, and said he wanted to give him something. Jun's mouth dropped open like a Pixar character seeing magic for the first time. Yoongi's sister clenched her teeth in rage. Others stared in disbelief. Only the youngest brother seemed unfazed. Yao's second daughter also clenched her jaw, watching her father spoil his grandson. Even Dango and Yoongi were stunned by this sudden kindness. Jun tried to understand why he alone was receiving it. A luxurious birthday cake arrived. Yao blew out the candles as applause filled the room. The eldest son and daughter clapped enthusiastically, smiling wide. Several grandchildren rushed over to congratulate him. Yoongi simply applauded. His eldest son lowered his gaze. Only Jun watched with quiet determination. Jun glanced sideways when a woman ordered his mother to bring more food. His mother carried wine and glasses like a maid. Jun noticed how nervous she was, yet she kept smiling gently. One sister demanded cold water with ice. Another brother's wife ordered her to clear the dishes. As Donggyo hurried, a girl snapped at her to move faster before returning to cheerful conversation. Jun clenched his fists. There were plenty of servants, yet they treated his mother like hired help. Watching her work, he remembered how she once buttoned his jacket with care. She smiled as if she enjoyed it. Jun's cheeks flushed slightly at her beauty. Donggyo placed her hand on Jun's cheek, smiling tenderly, calling him handsome. Jun was stunned. Living in a child's body still felt strange, but her warmth grounded him. When another girl scolded her for being slow, Jun's brows furrowed in anger. He endured it, silently promising himself that one day his mother would never be treated this way again. Turning away, Jun looked at his grandfather smiling and drinking wine, calm and distant. Yao held his glass like a king surveying his kingdom. Jun realized it was likely because of his grandfather's indifference that his parents were treated this way. Suddenly, Jun remembered his grandfather asking if he liked the horse he was given. He recalled the massive white toy horse in the nursery. Back then, he couldn't believe it had been prepared just because he wanted it. Studying his grandfather now, Jun wondered if guilt haunted him, if he was trying to atone for casting out his son. With a faint smile, Jun decided to see how long this kindness would last. Looking up with an innocent face, Jun said he preferred a real horse over a plastic one. Yao was shocked. Jun continued, saying he liked real cars more than toy ones and wanted a real boat that sailed the sea, not something used in a bathtub. Yao froze, his smile fading. Jun felt a flash of fear, wondering if he had crossed a line. Yao frowned and asked what Jun thought was real. Regaining composure, Jun smiled and replied that everything his grandfather made was real, because he created real cars, ships, and televisions. The words of his grandson greatly surprised old Yao. He bent down, resting his hands on his knees, and carefully studied the boy's face. His sharp eyes examined Jun closely, as if wondering whether the child had passed some kind of invisible test. Slowly, Yao parted his lips and told his grandson that obtaining real things in life required hard work, suffering, and enduring countless hardships. Inwardly, the protagonist almost laughed. In his past life, He was the one who had done all the dirty work, suffered endlessly, and died in the end. Yal straightened up, a faint smile appearing as he made a proposal. If Jun finished the year with excellent marks in all subjects, he promised to buy him a real horse for his birthday. Jun's eyes widened in shock. The old man smiled and asked why Jun looked so uncertain about himself. A grin spread across Jun's face. He honestly wasn't sure he could do it perfectly. Smirking slightly, he asked if that was all he needed to do. Yal crossed his arms and replied that he would be waiting. Grandfather and grandson exchanged silent smiles. The events returned to the present. Jun frowned, deciding it was time to change things. Suddenly, a man in a suit called out to him, his brother and the other children, telling them to follow. It was Yonan, wearing a faint smile, explaining that Grandpa had ordered them to be taken to the playroom. The moment Jun saw him, anger surged. Memories hit like a flashback scene from a crime movie. The lakeshore, the gun, the man standing there calmly. Yonan. The same man who once told him he trusted no one, not even his wife, except him. The same man who gave the order to kill him. While the other children followed Yonan happily, Jun and his brother lingered behind. Inside, Jun burned with rage, but outwardly he showed nothing. This time he was Yongan. He was Jun and he didn't need to worry. Soon the children arrived at a room where a white horse had been placed. A gift for Jun. Kangan shoved past him and rushed forward, climbing onto the horse with a wide grin. He laughed loudly, showing off as the other children gathered around him. Jun and his brother stood near the door, watching silently. Jun frowned, his anger rising, until his brother gently touched his clenched fist, trying to calm him down. Jun looked at his brother and realized something. He was used to this. Not just him, but their entire family had long been accustomed to being treated this way. A smirk slowly formed on Jun's face. He decided he would not tolerate it anymore. With his hands in his pockets, Jun walked forward. Kangan looked puzzled as Jun stopped in front of the horse. Jun calmly told him to get off, saying the horse belonged to him. Kangan laughed arrogantly, saying he would do whatever he wanted. The other children burst into laughter, treating it like a scene straight out of a spoiled rich kid sitcom. Without saying a word, Jun lifted his leg and kicked the back of the horse. The sudden movement startled Kangan. The horse collapsed and Kangan fell hard. His leg was pinned beneath it. Screams filled the room. The children froze in fear. Someone shouted that they would call the adults. Kangan cried in pain, clutching his leg. Jun walked up to him, looked down calmly, and warned him never to touch what belonged to him again. Kangan gritted his teeth and cried harder. A woman's scream echoed as Kangan's mother rushed in. Other women followed, confused by the chaos. A worker lifted the horse while Kangan's mother pulled his leg free and cradled him. Jun glanced at his own mother, who covered her mouth in shock. He winked at her with a faint smirk. Suddenly, a sharp slap landed across Jun's face. Kangan's furious mother screamed, asking if he was insane. She struck him again. Jun felt no anger, no emotion. She raised her hand for a third blow, but Jun's mother stepped in, shielding her son with her body and holding him tightly. Kangan's mother screamed for Jun to leave immediately. Jun's mother begged for forgiveness, trembling as she protected her child. Jun was stunned. His mother shielded his eyes, her body shaking. Kangan's mother raised her hand again, veins bulging on her forehead. A sharp voice cut through the room. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Yal stood there. The room fell silent. Kangan's mother hesitated, trying to explain, but Yal ordered her to stop. He told her to take her son to the hospital immediately. She picked Kangan up and left without another word. Yal waited until she was gone, then looked at his grandson. Jun met his gaze. His mother released him and quickly checked him for injuries. Yal ordered everyone else to leave except Jun nervously. Jun's mother held his shoulders, searching his face. Jun smiled and nodded, reassuring her. She bowed her head and left, glancing back uneasily. When they were alone, Yal asked if Jun was the one responsible. Jun confirmed it without hesitation. Yal frowned and asked why he would do something so dangerous. Jun reminded him that the horse was his, a gift from his grandfather. Yal's eyes widened. Jun calmly added that Kangun tried to take it, so he broke the horse instead, because he would rather destroy it than let someone else take what belonged to him. Yal narrowed his eyes, asking if Jun truly meant that. Jun confirmed it again, watching closely for his reaction. Then Yal smiled. The anger vanished. He looked at Jun with approval. Jun immediately understood. This was the cruelty of an empire builder, the mindset of a ruler who never gives up even an inch of territory. Like a mafia boss or a warlord from a blockbuster movie, Yal respected strength. However, Yal soon stopped smiling. He said that even if Jun didn't intend to hurt his brother, he still caused harm and must be punished. Jun bowed his head, accepting it without protest. Yal turned and told Jun to follow him. Moments later, Jun was shocked as he entered the office. His grandfather walked to the head of a long table where the core members of the company were already seated. Jun's mouth fell open. Jun studied the people sitting at the table and glanced at Yonan, realizing this was a place only the truly powerful were allowed to enter. Yal crossed his arms at the head seat, releasing an invisible pressure that made the room feel heavy. Jun stood near the entrance, stunned. Even in his past life, despite serving the Siang family for over 10 years, he had never been allowed here. Now he was inside. Jun knelt behind his grandfather, copying his posture. Though tense, he hid it well. His attention shifted to Yonan, seated hesitantly in a position that hinted at succession. Jun realized Yonan had already been chosen as the heir. Yal ordered the directors to speak freely. One director said the current president was too stubborn and would not step down even as his term ended. Yal asked what would happen if the president continued to resist. Another director confirmed the president could gather his own support, his own army. Yal closed his eyes thoughtfully. The directors began discussing scenarios and strategies. Jun raised an eyebrow, confused. Army, people. This didn't sound like corporate politics. One director explained that there were already more than 1 million people nationwide involved, and if the military joined in, the number could double. Yal opened his eyes slightly, surprised, and asked calmly whether people were afraid of weapons. Imagining the scene of the protests, one of the directors explained that if the people were calmed down, fear would return. But if the army stepped in, then protests and uprisings would only be the beginning. Hearing this, Yal slammed the table and shouted, demanding to know what the director meant. Was he preparing for the fall of the government? Did he really think the next president would come from the opposition? Yal struck the table again. The directors instantly fell silent, eyes closed in fear. Yal shouted angrily, saying that of course it was possible, but the opposite was just as likely. Jun watched them coldly. These were the same people who had pinned everything on him in his past life and even ordered his murder. Then Yi raised his hands and spoke. He said the government would not collapse. The successor was already known. The brothers sitting opposite nodded in agreement. The remaining directors bowed silently. Jun, sitting on his knees, felt everything was strange. He knew that in just 3 days an announcement of the president's surrender would be made. The directors continued whispering among themselves, clustering together, arguing quietly about power and positioning. Jun watched sadly from the side. He realized no one was planning strategy. Remembering meetings from his past life, Jun expected sharp analysis, decisive planning, something worthy of power. Instead, he clenched his fist in disappointment. Finally, Yal closed his eyes and ordered everyone to leave and focus on gathering information. The directors stood, bowed, and left, still arguing until the very end about hierarchy. Jun remained kneeling as the room emptied. Yal called out to him and gave permission to stand. Jun staggered and nearly fell, supporting himself against a cabinet. He had been kneeling too long. Yao looked at him with surprise and praised him, saying that even adults could not endure sitting still for so long without showing discomfort. Jun grinned. In truth, he had simply been listening too closely to notice the pain. Yao then grew serious and asked why Jun had changed so drastically. Jun realized his grandfather had noticed the difference. Bowing his head slightly, Jun said he would not endure it anymore. Because his parents were passive, he had endured everything until now, but he was too angry to keep holding back. Yao stared at his grandson in silence. At moments like this, a few tears would have fit the scene perfectly. Instead, Jun suddenly felt arms wrap around him. Yao dropped to one knee and hugged him. Jun froze in shock. Feeling sympathy for his grandson, Yao smiled. Jun decided to push things further. With calm confidence, he told his grandfather they should be friends with all three. Yao grabbed Jun's shoulders, eyes wide, demanding to know what he was talking about. With an innocent expression, Jun explained that he meant what they discussed earlier about the next president. His words stunned Yao. Jun smiled slightly and said that since the president was the most powerful person in the country, and it was unclear who would win, it was smarter to be friends with all three candidates. Yao frowned, thinking carefully. Jun asked if it was possible. Yao's lips curled into a smile. He replied that the more friends one had, the better. Then he laughed loudly. Jun smiled to himself, deciding that was enough for today. Standing up, Yao asked if Jun wanted to go play. Then he added that he had work to do and told Jun to send Yonan to him. Watching his grandson leave, Yao frowned thoughtfully. He picked up the corded phone and ordered his secretary to treat all three candidates like VIPs, expressing hopes for a successful resolution. After hanging up, Yao smiled in disbelief. His 10-year-old grandson had just played political chess like a seasoned strategist. Yonan soon entered. Yao smiled and reminded him that, for now, he was speaking as a grandfather, not a chairman. Nervous, Yonan scratched the back of his head. When asked for a solution, Yonan said that if the military was deployed, things would quiet down, the current government would remain, and its successor would become the next president. Yao barely smiled and said he would trust him and stand behind him. Yonan froze in shock. Yao asked if he could trust him. Yonan looked away, unable to answer. Disappointed, Yao waved him off. As Yonan left, Yao leaned back, realizing that the younger one was better suited for this era. Jun peeked from around the corner and grinned. That evening, Yi's car drove down the highway. Donggyo asked her husband what his father had said. Yoongi replied that his father told him to focus on educating his sons. Looking into the rearview mirror, he called out to Jun. He told him he wasn't angry and that Jun had already been punished. Yoongi added that their grandfather would send both boys to a personal tutor. Sangun screamed in fear, but Yoongi reassured him that attendance was optional. He then asked Jun's opinion. Jun realized he no longer needed a teacher, but since it was his grandfather's order, he agreed. Yoongi nodded, saying he would prepare everything. Jun noticed his brother leaning closer, whispering that Jun had been amazing today and thanking him for making Kangun cry. Jun smiled, realizing his brother had been holding resentment too. The date shifted to June 29, 1987. On television, the president delivered a historic address as crowds gathered around small shop TVs. Jun sipped juice through a straw, watching calmly. He knew exactly what would happen next. When they reached home, Jun entered under security supervision. A worker told him his grandfather had come to see him. Shocked, Jun turned just as shouting echoed from inside. Donggyo stood firm, telling Yao she had never claimed a share in the company and never would. She understood his intention to raise Jun as a successor, but reminded him that Jun was only 10 and should choose his own future. Yao grew furious, accusing her of rejecting his final chance. Donggyo clenched her fists, apologized, then calmly said she and Yoongi wanted Jun to live freely. Jun stepped forward and called out to his grandfather. Yao spread his arms and smiled, lifting Jun with ease and asking if he had just returned from school. Jun glanced at his mother, surprised by her courage. When asked if he was angry, Yao smiled and said he had only raised his voice slightly. Jun stared at them blankly, realizing they thought he understood nothing. He asked them not to fight over him and said that, when he grew up, he would become exactly what he wanted. Yao grimaced. Jun smiled faintly, and added that this was why he would become the boss of a big company, just like his grandfather. Yao burst into laughter, delighted. He said talent sometimes skipped a generation. Donggyo stared in shock, speechless. Yao grabbed Jun's shoulders and happily asked Donggyo if she still had objections. Tears filled her eyes as she turned away to prepare tea. Later, Yao sat beside Jun in his room filled with books and asked if he remembered what he said about befriending 3 people. Jun smiled. He remembered everything. Yao explained that he had already sent gifts to them. Things, however, had taken an unexpected turn. Jun listened closely as his grandfather described alliances forming. Smiling, Jun asked if those 3 people were the candidates for president. Yao smiled, confirming that each of them wanted to become something like a ruler. If the second and third candidates united and won, they would become the leader and deputy. Yang Qiao immediately rejected this idea. Hearing this, Jun raised his hands and closed his eyes, saying that in that case, there was no reason for the second and third to unite, because among them only one could ever become the leader. Asking if this meant they were never truly united. Jun opened his eyes and calmly replied that the third place would never help the second without receiving something in return. Someone ranked 10th or 20th might help for nothing, but never the third. That position was too close to the throne. Yang Qiao frowned deeply. Throughout his life, every influential person he met assumed unity was natural, yet his grandson was the only one who said it could never happen. Yang Qiao slowly extended his hand and placed it on Jun's head. Smiling, he asked how Jun could be so sharp at such a young age. Jun smiled back, saying nothing. The next morning, his car drove along a wooded highway. Jun sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his mood sinking as familiar scenery passed by. His parents asked why he suddenly wanted to visit the western coast. Jun smiled and said his textbook mentioned a secluded place where the western sea connected with the northern one, and he wanted to see it himself. They exchanged puzzled looks. In truth, that wasn't the reason. Jun needed to confirm something. Standing near a small shop, Jun decided to check what he looked like now. When he glanced toward a nearby house, shock froze him in place. He covered his mouth, panic rising as he imagined facing his parents from his past life. Then he noticed an elderly couple chatting happily behind a window. Tears welled up in Jun's eyes. He lowered his hands and whispered, calling them Mom and Dad. Relief washed over him. They were alive. Suddenly, the door opened. His former mother stepped outside and startled him by asking why he was crying. Jun stared at her, speechless. His former father followed, crossing his arms and smiling as he asked if the boy was lost. Jun quickly denied it, saying he was looking for a friend's house. When asked about the friend's name, Jun hesitated and mentioned it. The couple froze. They said no one by that name lived nearby. Then the woman casually mentioned their daughter Henji. Jun's mouth fell open. In his past life, there had never been a child named Henji. Reality shifted. The version of him from the previous timeline didn't exist here. The newspaper slid off the table inside the house, revealing a headline announcing the presidential election victory. Elsewhere, Yang Qiao leaned back, staring at the paper. He smiled faintly, remembering Jun's words. Now he understood. His grandson's instincts had been right. Back at home, Jun sat at the table, arms crossed, deep in thought. The future was already changing. The appearance of Henji proved it. The more things shifted, the more dangerous it became. His greatest weapon, knowledge of the future, was slowly losing accuracy. Jun frowned. Before turning 20, he needed to prepare everything. He needed land, influence, shares, power. He remembered the car accident that would kill him on his 20th birthday. That death had to be prevented at all costs. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His mother entered, smiling gently and calling his name. Jun smiled back and followed her, clenching his fists. No matter how much he thought, there was only one way forward. Act carefully, observe results, adjust daily. That evening, the lights of the S Hotel shone brightly. Yang Qiao smiled widely when he saw Jun run toward him. The boy hugged his grandfather, still not used to the affection, but unable to resist it either. They sat together under a glowing chandelier. Yang Qiao looked at Jun with satisfaction. Clearly, things had gone well. Jun asked innocently if something good had happened. Yang Qiao laughed and said seeing him already made him feel better, promising to buy him anything he wanted. Jun raised an eyebrow and asked if this was because of his grades. Yang Qiao froze. Jun calmly announced that he had scored perfect marks in every subject, 100 points each, the only student in his class to do so. Yang Qiao burst out laughing, saying it was too late to buy a horse today. Jun smiled, pretending to be modest, saying he didn't even know how to ride one yet. When he asked why his grandfather was being so generous, Yang Qiao explained that thanks to Jun's advice, the company had grown stronger and secured another 5 years of stability. Jun asked for something more. Yang Qiao pondered, then suggested building another ranch. Jun's eyes lit up. This was exactly what he wanted. When asked where, Yang Qiao mentioned a place north of Seoul, already home to a ranch. Jun hesitated. That wasn't the location he wanted. With a thoughtful expression, Jun said that since they lived in Gangnam, it was too far. Yang Qiao laughed, calling him picky. Jun countered confidently, saying there was no ranch in the south and that it could be built. After all, Grandpa could create anything. Yang Qiao laughed loudly, clearly pleased. He explained that out of Sang's many branches, most were built by his own hands. Creation required obsession, patience, and hunger. Jun realized this wasn't just about a ranch. This was a business lesson. Yang Qiao placed a hand on Jun's shoulder and said he would help him take his first step. A map of Seoul and its surrounding regions was brought in. Yang Qiao handed Jun a marker and told him to choose wisely. Jun stared at the map, heart racing. Land values here would skyrocket in 10 or 20 years. This was the foundation for absorbing Sang Group in the future. Jun circled a location. Southern Nui. The assistants reported that it was a rural area with poor infrastructure, low population, and almost no development potential. Yang Qiao tapped the table, thinking. Then he ordered them to investigate land purchases above 50,000 won. Jin furrowed his eyebrows and smiled quietly, thinking about everything he had just accomplished. The man across from him stood up and walked away from the table, heading toward the exit. The grandfather folded his hands on the table and looked at the boy, saying calmly that the land Jun had chosen was nothing but a mud hole. If it were up to him, he would never have bought it, that it would take a very long time for the land to generate any income. Jun's eyes widened and explained that Jun was different. In 20 or 30 years, that land could become extremely valuable. Jun would live long enough to see those changes, which meant he could treat the land as savings and preserve it for the future. But inside, Jun was already shaking his head. He wouldn't need to wait 20 or 30 years. In just 2 years, this land would turn into a brand new city in Bundon. He imagined skyscrapers rising everywhere. Reaching for his sushi, Jun thought calmly that he had just secured 50,000 pyong right in the center of a future city. As he chewed, the conversation shifted. Someone asked whether the man truly intended to run for the Jongno district seat. He answered yes without hesitation. Soyeon smiled and commented that although he was a newcomer, he had strong middle-class support. The chairman frowned and replied that he already had a deputy in Jongno who could respond instantly. Soyeon arched her eyebrows and said it was a pity her father had to spend money on someone like that. The man frowned and reminded her that he was the one who paved the way for the man's rise to the prosecutor general's office. Embarrassed, the man apologized. Soyeon slammed her hand down and shouted that he didn't deserve such treatment. The man smiled faintly and asked if she really thought that. He reminded her that he made her father chief prosecutor using money and influence, and turned him into a deputy prosecutor as well. All of it was done to turn them into loyal guard dogs for the Siang group. The man looked down, his face flushed red, fist clenched tightly. The man turned toward Choi's son-in-law and folded his arms across his chest. The man shouted, and Joel frowned, immediately telling him to get rid of the nonsense and useless thoughts filling his head. The man nodded, explaining that after just one phone call from the chairman, all his relatives working in prosecution and justice were quietly exiled to provincial posts. The chairman then turned to Soyeon, pointing out that she owned a department store and still dared to feel dissatisfied. She clasped her hands, realizing he had seen straight through her plan to push her husband into politics, seize power, and eliminate her brothers to take over the group. She lowered her head and apologized. The chairman calmly told them all to be content with what they had. Jun sipped his drink through a straw and glanced sideways. Soyeon and her fiancé walked past, their faces filled with frustration. Jun smiled faintly. Greed had crushed them again. It must sting watching sibling after sibling rise while being quietly erased from the inheritance list. Closing his eyes, Jun relaxed. He could safely eliminate them from his mental checklist. The grandfather smiled and asked if Jun was bored. Jun replied that everything was fine and that he was reading. The man approached with an envelope and said it was a good habit to always keep a book nearby. He handed the envelope to Jun. Jun took it in surprise and asked what it was. The total area was 88,000 pyong. Jun's eyes widened. His grandfather had added another 30,000 beyond the original discussion of 50,000. Jun pointed this out. The man chuckled, nodding that Jun remembered numbers well. There were multiple owners, but their individual plots were small, so he bought several. Jun immediately understood. With 80,000 pyong, the compensation alone in 2 or 3 years would reach 16 billion won. The grandfather asked if Jun liked it that much. Jun smiled and nodded. Closing his eyes, Jun imagined a massive white building. Apartments in Bundon would soon sell for 75 million won per unit. Jun hugged his grandfather, thanking him. The old man hugged him back. Jun smiled, thinking that being a little nice wasn't a bad idea when you've just been gifted 16 billion won. The Constitution of the Sixth Republic took effect. A president was directly elected. The July 7th Declaration was announced, promoting inter-Korean exchange and improved relations with the United States and North Korea. Market conditions peaked. People flooded into Seoul and housing prices exploded. The government announced plans to build 2 million homes. Cranes filled the skyline. Entire districts transformed. When the map was unveiled, the chairman smiled and said it was incredible. Haki asked what he meant. The chairman pointed to the map and said this was where Jun's ranch was built. Haki's eyes widened. That was the new city. The chairman smiled, saying the kid had thought 100 steps ahead and beaten everyone to it, all within a single year. The most ironic part was that he had originally opposed buying that land. The chairman laughed loudly. Later that night, Jun stared at his bank documents, covering his mouth as he giggled. 14 billion won. He planned to sell only 60,000 pyong for now and wait for the remaining 20,000 to rise further. His grandfather had said it clearly. This was Jun's money. Jun bowed his head over the table, laughing quietly. At future market prices, this would exceed 100 billion won. Then there was a knock at the door. Jun froze. Jun looked at his parents in surprise and nodded. They sat down on the sofa opposite him. His mother gently asked what he planned to do with the money. Jun raised his eyebrows and casually said that he had promised his grandfather he would save it in a jar. His parents exchanged uneasy looks and asked if that was really true. Jun smiled inwardly, realizing they were worried. To them, he was still just a child who had suddenly received an insane amount of money. He needed to calm them down, even though his own plans were far more complicated. His mother asked if there was anything he wanted to buy. Jun shook his head and said his mother already bought him everything he needed. Jun then said something unexpected. What mattered more was what they wanted to do with the money. Both parents froze. Jun raised his eyebrows, confused by their reaction. His father slowly stood up and walked away. Jun watched him anxiously, his mouth slightly open. His mother closed her eyes and gently held Jun's hands, smiling as she explained that his father was just overwhelmed. They could talk about it later. Jun nodded, but as she left, he frowned, wondering if he had said something wrong. Outside, his parents spoke quietly. His mother brushed it off, saying those were just words from an immature child and that he meant well. His father adjusted his glasses and admitted he wasn't angry, just ashamed. When Jun spoke, his heart had started racing. To him, that money represented a chance. His mother widened her eyes. His father clenched his fist, confessing that as a parent, he felt pathetic drooling over his child's money. She smiled and took his arm, saying it was natural. With that much money, their family could even live abroad together. That was the future she imagined. Jun stood by the door, listening quietly, smiling to himself. They truly loved him. Later, Jun approached his father on the sofa and apologized. His father smiled and said he wasn't angry, only surprised. Then he asked what Jun wanted to do now. Jun opened his eyes wide and said he would do whatever he wanted. His father blinked in surprise and asked what that was. Jun looked up at him calmly and said he wanted to become the president of a company even bigger than his grandfather. His father burst out laughing. Jun didn't understand what was so funny. Siang Group was the #1 company in Korea. His father smiled kindly and said Jun dreamed big. Jun replied that this was why he needed his dad's help. His father adjusted his glasses and said he didn't think he could help much. He had studied business in England, but his true passion had always been cinema. Jun's eyes lit up. That was exactly what he needed. He asked if his father still had contacts from his time studying in England. His father stared at him in shock and slowly folded his hands, studying his son carefully. Elsewhere, the Siang Group building glowed in the sunset. Yonan clenched his teeth in frustration after hearing that Jun had received 14 billion won as land compensation, with another 10 billion coming later. Even if Jun simply put the money in the bank, the interest alone would be enormous. Apartments, rental income, endless possibilities. Yonan shouted that it wasn't the point. His grandfather was a man who never gave away even a single one without reason, yet he had handed Jun a ranch, land, and full control over the money. That alone said everything. Compared to that, Yonan realized how little he himself was valued. Back at Jun's house, the evening sky glowed pink. His father opened the door to greet an old friend from England. Jun widened his eyes in shock as the man introduced himself. Sean, chairman of PowerShares Korea. Jun froze. In the future, this company would grow into a financial monster, managing hundreds of trillions of won. To Jun, it was like meeting the Warren Buffett of Korea before the world realized who he was. Sean asked if he could speak to Jun alone. His father smiled and encouraged Jun to listen carefully. Sean placed his briefcase against the wall and sat down, folding his hands calmly. He said he heard Jun wanted to become a businessman. Jun nodded without hesitation. Sean asked if Jun wanted to follow in his grandfather's footsteps. Jun replied that he wanted something even bigger. Sean smiled and said Siang was already the largest company in Korea. Wanting more sounded greedy. Jun smiled and said it wasn't greed, it was a dream. Sean laughed, saying Jun had inherited his grandfather's hunger and his father's imagination. Jun asked if Sean himself ran a big company. Sean nodded, explaining that his business was different. His job was to make rich people even richer. Jun's eyes widened. He asked if Sean dealt with people who had a lot of money. Sean confirmed it. Jun then asked if Sean could increase his money too. Sean laughed, then shook his head. He explained that all his clients were already wealthy adults. Jun asked if his father hadn't told him about his money. Confused, Sean listened as Jun explained he had 14 billion won now, with another 10 billion coming soon. Sean froze. 14 billion. Jun casually handed him a notebook and said it was an investment plan he had created. Sean slowly flipped through the pages. His expression changed. Sweat formed on his brow as he read projections, stock strategies, and long-term investment structures. Jun sipped his drink calmly, watching Sean's reaction. Sean finally closed the notebook and asked how a 12-year-old could know such things. Jun smiled and said he was just smart. Sean shook his head, saying no one would believe this came from a child. Even top university students didn't think this far ahead. Jun replied calmly that those students weren't grandchildren of a chaebol chairman, nor did they dream as big as he did. He explained that he had spent years listening to his grandfather, learning from every conversation. Sean asked if Jun's grandfather had helped with the plan. Jun smiled vaguely and said he had simply listened closely. Sean went outside to speak with Jun's father. Staring into space, he admitted that Jun was no ordinary child. This wasn't about good grades. The boy thought differently, sharper, deeper. His father smiled quietly. Sean fell silent, gripping his suitcase, realizing he needed time to think. The game had just reached another level. Yoongi reached out, trying to stop Sean, but watched him leave anyway. He froze in place, eyebrows raised, still processing Sean's words about Jun being a genius. The problem was, he didn't even know what Jun was a genius at. From inside the house, Jun watched through the window. The moment his father looked up, Jun smiled brightly and waved. Yoongi frowned, a bead of sweat forming on his face. It was already night, yet the second-floor window glowed with light. Sean paused and asked Jun directly whether he had used information from his grandfather to create the investment plan. Jun turned toward him and with an innocent expression answered yes. Sitting on a child's computer chair, he let silence fill the room. Sean closed his eyes, nodded, and said that a plan backed by the Siang Group chairman's perspective would naturally be valuable. Standing up, the wooden floor creaked. Sean adjusted the documents in his hands and said bluntly that Jun wouldn't need any investment textbooks. Jun knew he had no choice. Using his grandfather as an excuse was the only way to force his father's friend to follow the plan. Sean packed the papers into his briefcase and said that by the end of the year, an investment company in America could be established. Jun would own it entirely, keep his savings overseas, and part of the funds would cover operating costs. Jun replied calmly that those details could be handled without Sean's involvement, then added that he had one more request. Sean smiled nervously and asked what surprise was coming next. Jun grinned. Downstairs, footsteps creaked as Sean descended. Yoongi stood up from the couch and asked if Jun had caused trouble. Sean placed a heavy hand on his shoulder and said, with narrowed eyes, that he was jealous of his friend's son. Yoongi slumped onto the sofa in relief and asked why. Sean explained that Jun planned to invest only 10 billion won. Confused, Yoongi asked what Jun would do with the remaining 4 billion. Sean leaned forward and said the boy wanted to start a film production company. Yoongi froze. Sean added casually that Jun had already chosen his father as the first CEO candidate. Yoongi jumped back in shock. Sean smiled, explaining that with 4 billion won, at least 10 Korean films could be produced. Yoongi pressed his lips together, thinking, if he invested personally as well, the profits could multiply. Sean noted that Jun was frighteningly perceptive. He asked him to lead the company knowing Yoongi would never accept direct money. It was psychological judo. Yoongi lowered his gaze, silent. The next day at the chairman's residence, the secretary explained that Sean was the chairman of PowerShares Korea. Yang Chial frowned, surprised that his son knew someone like that. Haki calmly added that they had studied together in England. Yang Chial scoffed, saying Jun should have simply put the money in the bank for interest. Instead, he chose to start an investment company. Sean's profile lay on the desk. Yang Chial dismissed him as a fly attracted to his grandson's money, but once alone, he leaned back and smiled. Jun was exactly like him, dissatisfied with percentages, always hungry for more. On November 3, 1989, Jun arrived in Manhattan. Skyscrapers reflected sunlight like a movie opening shot. Sean called the building slightly shabby. Jun thought it looked like a palace. Inside, a sign read Fantasy Investment Inc. Sean thought the name childish. Jun thought it was destiny. Employees gathered. Jun was introduced as CEO. They stared, stunned. Jun spoke fluent English. Sean was baffled. Jun explained that learning foreign languages was mandatory to survive at Siang. In his past life, it had been non-negotiable. Jun immediately asked the staff to investigate a company. Martin Bell. Sean's eyes widened. Employees whispered, confused, thinking he meant a computer brand. Jun explained calmly. At age 12, Martin sold stamps directly, bypassing auction fees. He used targeted marketing, simplified distribution, and later founded a world-class computer company. Sean stared. How did a child know this? Jun smiled. Martin had earned money at 12 without a rich grandfather. Wasn't it obvious he'd become enormous? Sean ordered immediate research. Days later, they met at a burger joint. Sean explained they were late. Martin Computer already had $30 million in funding. Timing mattered. Inside the crowded restaurant, Jun spotted a man with glasses. Sean confirmed it. Martin Bell. 27 years old. One of the richest men alive. They sat down. Martin said he had 15 minutes. Sean introduced fantasy investment. Martin said he didn't need funding. Jun watched quietly. Then he spoke. He said Martin's past was Jun's present. Martin squinted. Jun explained that Martin had $2,000 at age 12. Jun already had $15 million. Martin froze. Jun declared he wanted to become a major shareholder once the company went public next year. Martin's expression changed instantly. Jun added he would buy all available shares and join the board, transferring voting rights back to Martin until resale, with a buyback option at market price. The table went silent. Martin studied the boy. Finally, he laughed. He asked the child's name. Jun smiled. Howard. Later in the car, Sean admitted he still couldn't process what he'd seen. Jun calmly said the truth. He was a 40-year-old man reborn with future knowledge. Sean stared, then crossed his arms, dismissing it as science fiction. Jun laughed. Sean sighed and looked out the window. People understood the past and future at different ages. There was no reason to doubt the mind of someone who had already lived it. The boy smiled as the plane began its descent, the runway lights stretching beneath them. Reports from the New York branch claimed the trip was just sightseeing and shopping, but holding a folder in his hands, Yang Chial scoffed. His grandson didn't travel with Sean for leisure. This was business. The secretary bowed and promised to investigate further. Noticing his hesitation, Yang Chial asked why he looked so tense. Haki clenched his fists and revealed that Yoongi was currently creating a film production company. The chairman froze in surprise. According to the report, the plan was nearly complete. Filming would begin next year, and Yoongi was attempting to manage 2 projects at once. The folder slipped from Yang Chial's hand. Grinding his teeth, He demanded to know whether Yoongi was using his son's money. Haki confirmed it. 4 billion won. The old man slammed the table, crossing his arms in anger. He snapped that his grandson had made a mistake by gaining recognition but failing to spend money properly. Even if the money belonged to Jun, it should not be wasted so carelessly. Haki cautiously objected, saying the film project could succeed. Yang Chial shot him a deadly look and replied that Yoongi had lived his entire life like a slacker. Making movies was not easy. If it were, there wouldn't be so many box office disasters. Still, Haki added that if even one film succeeded, it would prove Jun's investment instincts were terrifyingly accurate. Late that night, lights glowed in the cottage windows. Investment reports covered the table. Jun had invested around $9 million into Martin Computer and was reviewing candidates for the remaining $6 million. As he flipped through documents, one name caught his eye. Microsoft. Sean smiled and said the tech field was risky. Jun frowned. How could Bill Gates' company be dangerous? Sean explained that Microsoft's operating systems weren't receiving strong market reactions, and rumors suggested IBM might develop its own system and cut ties. Jun thought briefly about future versions of DOS and decided it didn't matter. A year or two wouldn't change the outcome. Sean admitted that if it were him, he would still choose Microsoft. Jun agreed calmly. Sometimes, betting on the future meant trusting inevitability. Jun then asked Sean to sell the remaining land. Sean was confused. Why sell before prices peaked? Jun explained that fantasy investment needed additional capital. If $15 million went into major companies, they needed liquidity to keep playing the game. Sean finally understood and slapped his knee. Half the proceeds would be reinvested, the rest held in reserve. After Sean left, Jun leaned back, legs crossed, staring at the ceiling. His knowledge of the future was incomplete. He wasn't a Wall Street trader. He had never stood on the exchange floor. His memory came from scattered articles and headlines. But he had one unbeatable weapon: movies. In his mind, the massive Hollywood sign appeared. He remembered blockbusters, box office kings, and studios that printed money like the MCU in its prime. Film alone could carry his empire for decades. A few days later, Sean returned with a thick folder labeled Hollywood Film Production Investments. Jun smiled. When asked if this was to prove something to his father, Jun answered without hesitation. Yes. As Jun scanned the list, one title annoyed him. Phantom Romance had already been released, but another caught his attention. A small family film still in production. The lead actor was a child. Sean dismissed it immediately, saying the budget had ballooned and production was shaky. The film had been transferred between studios and was stalled. Jun's eyes widened. He ordered them to invest, immediately, as much as possible. Sean snapped back, furious. Film investment wasn't like stocks. If stocks crashed, losses were controlled. A failed movie burned money with no exit. This wasn't investing. It was gambling. He flatly refused. Jun didn't look away. He said quietly that this would be the only time. In the future, he would stay silent on investments. Then he reminded Sean of something simple. Fantasy investment could afford to lose everything. After all, the richest man in Korea was his grandfather. Sean's veins bulged. Then he exhaled slowly. Fine. Jun added one condition: secure exclusive Korean distribution rights. Sean agreed. That was easy. They were the only investors. Sean left in a foul mood. Jun's mother watched him go, worried, but Jun smiled and said there was nothing to fear. Sean's anger would vanish the moment he saw the box office numbers. In Jun's hands was a single document. Home Alone. Time fast-forwarded. Microsoft released DOS 3, exploded into the PC market, and its stock surged. Martin Computer shares skyrocketed. Sean went from furious to euphoric. The $8 million invested in Home Alone was already paying off beyond expectations. Then the film premiered. Kevin screamed, traps snapped, the world laughed. Home Alone earned over 30 billion won in the US alone. Global release would push it even higher. Sean joked that Jun might become the richest underclassman on the planet. Jun smiled calmly. He was already preparing for high school. Yoongi stormed in, complaining about his schedule. Sean asked whether Yoongi's film could even find theater space. Yoongi admitted the truth. Every theater was waiting for Home Alone. Any competing film would be forgotten overnight. Sean grinned. He handed Yoongi a document. Full Korean distribution rights. Jun explained the plan. Only theaters that screened his father's film during the holidays would receive Home Alone. New Year's Eve was the perfect choke point. Yoongi stared at the paper, stunned, then rushed out to execute the deal. Sean laughed. His friend hadn't even asked where the documents came from. Jun then asked Sean to prepare a list of all films releasing that year. He planned to invest the $200 million fantasy investment had earned. Sean broke into a sweat. The return rate for employees was already 22%. Jun calculated quickly. 6 cycles a year meant 600% returns at minimum. Sean promised to prepare everything. Jun collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but satisfied. For the next 3 years, he would focus on school. Maintaining top grades was the price of his grandfather's trust. A knock came at the door. His mother peeked in and suggested dinner. Jun smiled and agreed. Downstairs, Yoongi rushed out, checking his watch. He said the film released today and he wanted to see it with his own eyes. Jun watched his father leave and smiled. The future wasn't coming anymore. After that, Jun opened a printed newspaper. He flipped to the middle and began reading casually when something suddenly caught his attention. He lowered the paper onto the coffee table. Every newspaper carried articles criticizing Ain Motors. Jun covered his mouth thoughtfully. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. In his memory, Ain Motors didn't truly collapse until after the 1997 financial crisis, and even then, it was absorbed by Diane Motors a year later. Rolling his eyes slightly, Jun considered 2 possibilities. Either the future had already changed because of him, or this was a one-time public criticism, part of the government's attempt to rein in large corporations. Turning his head, he called out to his mother in the kitchen. Without standing up, she answered. Jun asked when they would visit his grandfather. She replied that they would go tomorrow. Jun asked if he could go alone earlier. Smiling, she said he could go after breakfast and that his grandfather would like it. Watching her set the plates on the table, Jun asked if she would go to the cinema since today was the premiere. His mother replied that if there were no spectators, she would feel very nervous. Jun couldn't reassure her. The truth was, he remembered almost nothing about this film. Maybe it never even existed in the original timeline. Either way, he had already given his father a chance. What happened next depended on him alone. The next day, Jun stood quietly outside under the bright sun, simply watching. The chairman's residence glowed in the light. An elderly housekeeper told him his grandfather was in the office with guests. Jun said he would wait in the living room. He noticed 2 pairs of men's shoes in the hallway. Sitting on the large leather sofa, Jun couldn't stop thinking about the newspaper articles and the early morning meeting upstairs. He pressed his hands to his mouth, eyes focused forward. In his mind, he imagined the conversation unfolding. Yang Chial sat behind his desk, asking whether Yoongi was confident he could take over Ain Motors. Yoongi confirmed it. Acquiring Ain would secure second place in the industry, and if successful, Siang would become #1 in the country. Yang Chial entrusted the task to the vice chairman and ordered him to coordinate with Chairman Lee, demanding Ain be taken within a year. He promised to hand over the entire automobile industry if he succeeded. The men present widened their eyes in shock. Yoongi smiled brightly. The secretary stiffened. Giving away the automobile industry was nearly equivalent to handing over the entire conglomerate. He suspected the chairman had already chosen a successor. But Yang Qiao clarified calmly. He wasn't giving away all of Siang, only the automobile sector. Transferring those shares wouldn't threaten control, and even that alone would generate massive personal wealth. He smirked, saying Yoongi probably thought the same. When the meeting ended, Jun entered the office. He asked if his grandfather worked even on holidays. Yang Qiao replied that he had already finished. Jun's eyes landed on a newspaper headline on the desk. Lazy management of ownerless companies exposes structural weakness in large corporations. Jun's eyes sparkled. Today's meeting really had been about Ain Motors. He casually mentioned that his uncle seemed unusually cheerful. Yang Qiao brushed it off as holiday mood. Then Jun pointed at a folder on the desk. The title read, Restructuring the Domestic Automobile Industry and Government Support Measures. Jun froze. Suddenly, everything clicked. He asked why there was such noise about Ain Motors in the media today. Yang Qiao smiled and asked what was strange about it. Jun replied that whenever Siang appeared in newspapers, his grandfather usually became furious and demanded to know who leaked it. Yang Qiao laughed softly and explained that newspapers don't sell truth. They sell justifications. Traffic jams justify road construction. Urban complaints justify redevelopment. Jun listened, stunned. Then he asked the key question, who benefited from the articles about Ain Motors? Yang Qiao answered calmly, a competitor who wanted to weaken Ain. Jun's eyes widened. Did that mean Dayan Motors or Siang itself? Yang Qiao smiled and gently stroked Jun's head. Jun's heart pounded. In his original timeline, Dayan Motors absorbed Ain, not Siang. That meant his grandfather had failed back then. Now history was already shifting. At lunch, the entire family gathered. Plates filled the table. Relatives watched quietly as Yang Qiao suddenly asked his second daughter, not Jun's mother, to bring soup. The room froze. His mother watched in shock. The hierarchy had changed. Jun smiled faintly. His grandfather had acknowledged his parents in front of everyone. Later, Jun sneaked back into the office. He searched the documents on the desk, spreading them across the floor. His expression darkened. This wasn't a takeover plan. It was a government-backed consolidation policy. If Diane absorbed Ain, monopoly concerns would arise. That made Siang the only acceptable buyer. Jun clenched his fists. His grandfather was planning to manipulate policy itself. Footsteps echoed. Yang Qiao stood behind him. Jun froze. One wrong word could destroy years of trust. Choosing carefully, Jun told the truth, slightly bent. He said he had read the newspaper, noticed the folder, and became curious. He apologized for touching the documents. Yang Qiao stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. He praised Jun's curiosity and perseverance, but warned him never to enter the office alone again. The crisis passed, but Jun knew the real problem remained. Leaving the office, Jun clenched his fists. If Siang absorbed Ain, his future plans would collapse. He needed to stop the government itself from supporting this consolidation. Later, reports came in. The chairman of the Hami Group had purchased land in advance. Politicians had accepted bribes. Yang Qiao grimaced. The secretary advised staying away from the Blue House. This fire would be difficult to control. Yang Qiao slammed the folder shut. They would give up Ain Motors. The report was thrown into the trash. That night, Jun sat in his chair, sipping juice through a straw, legs crossed. He knew chaos wouldn't come immediately, but the anonymous information he had leaked would slowly spread. Sooner or later, the public would notice. And when they did, the future would shift once again. Dunn placed the bottle of juice on the table, his fingers tightening around it. That would be enough. With political circles shaken for a while longer, the government would have no choice but to reject Siang's proposal. They simply wouldn't have the time or stability to deal with anything else. Sunlight poured through the panoramic windows of towering skyscrapers. Sitting across from him on the sofa, Sean looked up from his documents when Dunn spoke. The boy suggested that Sean leave power shares and fully join fantasy investment. After all, Sean already owned 2% of the company, and the money he earned here would allow his salary to grow far beyond what he had now. Without lifting his eyes from the paperwork, Sean replied that he had no intention of going anywhere. Dunn widened his eyes in surprise and asked why. Sean calmly answered that his boss owned 98% of the shares and made investment decisions that were consistently successful. There was barely any work left for anyone else. Looking up, he asked if that wasn't true. A bead of sweat rolled down Dunn's temple. It shouldn't be like this. He needed a different approach. Clutching his knees, Dunn proposed creating a Korean branch to transfer part of the funds and manage them domestically. He casually mentioned that his grandfather also had a secret fund. Sean's pen froze. Dunn realized that during recent inquiries into who managed his money, his grandfather had concluded that Sean was capable enough to handle that fund. Sean frowned in displeasure. This wasn't information a child should know. Dunn explained calmly that he would only withdraw the money he personally invested in Martin Computer. Sean could manage his grandfather's fund and the remaining assets. Sean frowned deeply and asked if Dunn was really planning to pull money out of Martin Computer. Dunn nodded. He planned to do it early next year. Sean jumped to his feet, anger flashing across his face. Martin was a golden goose, smashing income ceilings every single day. The stock had never fallen since going public. Selling it made no sense. Leaning back into the sofa, Dunn closed his eyes and said they would talk about it later. Then he asked Sean what he thought about the Korean branch idea. Smiling faintly, Dunn clarified that this wasn't a proposal. It was a request. Sean narrowed his eyes and turned toward the window. The anger didn't leave his face, but after a long silence he said they would talk after he finished his work. Dunn smiled. He was ready to accept any conditions. Sean moved toward his desk. Dunn knew he needed an adult who wouldn't treat him like a child, someone smart and experienced. Until he became an adult himself, only Sean could fill that role. Sean turned back and asked what Dunn planned to do with the money from Martin Computer. Dunn casually replied that he wanted to invest in Japan. Sean nearly exploded. He slammed his foot down and sat heavily in the chair, snapping that newspapers were already screaming about the bubble bursting and Japan entering its greatest economic crisis. Dunn calmly replied that the greatest opportunities always appear during the greatest crises. Sean crossed his legs and scoffed. Only successful people say that. Everyone else dies trying. Dunn smiled and asked quietly if Sean thought he couldn't be that one in a million. Sean stared at him suspiciously. Dunn's smile felt unsettling. Elsewhere, morning sunlight rose over another skyscraper. Yoongi sat at his desk asking his children how their meeting with their grandfather had gone. Yonan crossed his arms and replied that their grandfather advised them to go to Europe and stay there until they were 30. Yoongi frowned and asked if Yonan had lost his temper. Yonan replied that he smiled, said he would try harder and left. Yoongi leaned back and praised his restraint, but he warned them that now their grandfather would watch their every move. Any rumors could affect not just them, but everyone around them. The siblings exchanged irritated looks. Then Yoongi announced that once his daughter graduated next year, he would arrange her marriage immediately. She protested sharply, saying no one got married right after university anymore. Yoongi silenced her. All they had done in life was be born with their grandfather's blood. If that favor disappeared, None of them would enjoy life anymore. Yonan looked away, irritated. Yoongi explained that their grandfather's favor had shifted. It was now focused on the youngest child. The room fell silent. Information had reached Yoongi that his father had personally watched the film Dun's family produced. Everyone was stunned. Yoongi told them to behave, visit their grandfather often, and not cause trouble. When the Siang group eventually fell into his hands, they would be free to live as they wished. After they left, Yoongi removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Ain Motors should have been his. Since then, too many problems had been resolved directly by the chairman without his involvement. Rumors spread through the conglomerate. Branch presidents argued, authority shifted. Yoongi clenched his fist. The child who was never considered a threat was now turning everything upside down. Meanwhile, Fantasy Investment officially established its Korean branch. Sean became the representative in both the US and Korea. Their relationship subtly changed. Sean stopped openly objecting and began listening more carefully. Sean questioned whether selling all Martin Computer shares at once was wise. Dun replied calmly that they had already made 100-fold profit. There was no reason to be greedy. Sean sighed, arguing was pointless. Documents spilled across the table. Sean admitted he was struggling to find the next investment target. Dun scanned the pages until one word caught his eye. Power banks. He smiled. Its founder was a third-generation Japanese-Korean. It didn't even plan to go public. Dun smiled wider. That meant opportunity. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Everything has a price. Sean asked how much Dun wanted to offer. Dun answered casually, start at 10 times, go up to 50. Sean nearly dropped the documents. Dun reminded him that Martin had already grown 100 times. Power banks could do the same. Sean warned him it was a gamble. Dun replied calmly that you can't play poker alone. Eventually, Sean agreed to push the deal. Days later, Sean returned with news. He had secured the shares at 35 times the price. Now all they could do was trust Dun's luck. Dun smiled and said everything would be fine. He pierced the lid of his yogurt with a straw and told Sean to sell Martin shares, buy power banks, and keep the rest for himself. Next year, Dun would enter high school and focus entirely on academics. Sean laughed, saying it was the first time he'd heard a student talk about studying so awkwardly. Dun smiled and said he wanted to study law. Sean froze. Dun explained calmly. His grandfather was the best entrepreneur in Korea. His uncle studied economics abroad. There was nothing new for him there. Law was different. He wanted to prove something. That even a third-generation chaebol could earn admission through pure academic ability. That evening, Dun sat with his grandfather, drinking tea. When Dun said he planned to attend a regular Korean school, his grandfather frowned and immediately proposed sending him to Switzerland. Dun smiled and said he planned to attend the University of Seoul, specifically the law faculty. Yang Chiao was displeased. Dun explained gently that law school demanded the highest scores, no shortcuts, no dirty tricks. Society would be forced to recognize true ability. Memories flashing through his mind of other businessmen boasting about their grandchildren. This was different. Looking at Dun, Yang Chiao smiled and said that no one in his life had ever made him happier than his youngest grandson. When Dun enrolled in law school, he could ask for any gift he wanted. Dun smiled softly. This time the gift wouldn't be a car. It would be power. Jun pictured Yao standing in front of the company building. In July 1994, Power Bank shares officially went public at 18,900 yen per share, the highest price at listing. The chairman appeared in a black suit on opening day. and the company's market capitalization instantly exploded past 200 billion yen. Jun watched green numbers pile up. His investment of $230 million turned into $850 million, netting him $620 million in just 1 year. Before the bubble burst, Jun sold every single share. For the next 3 years of high school, he disappeared from the market completely and focused on studying. Occasionally, he invested in Hollywood films purely as a hobby, projects like Love on the Titanic directed by James Cameron, treating movies the way billionaires treat golf. Sangin graduated from high school without incident and left for America to study, lacking the credits to enter a top domestic university. At the airport, departure boards flashed overhead as his brother waved goodbye. Jun watched calmly. From the very beginning, no expectations had ever been placed on Sangin, which ironically gave him freedom to pursue what he truly wanted. As the plane climbed through the blue sky, Jun stared out the window. Now all eyes were on him, the only third-generation heir still standing in the spotlight of the Sang group. He wondered what would happen once he entered Seoul University. Some people watched his grades with admiration, others with fear. Only his parents and grandfather watched him with hope. The day before entrance exam results were announced, Yal sat in his office on the phone, smiling. His youngest grandson ranked 39th nationwide. Among humanities students alone, Jun ranked 10th out of 400, scoring 367 out of 400. Only 6 points separated him from first place. The gap was so small it felt like bad RNG rather than lack of ability. When Yal received the results, he proudly told everyone that Jun would study law at Seoul University, even though those scores were strong enough for Harvard or Oxford. Scholarships, he said, should go to students who need them. Their family could pay full tuition easily, but Jun was simply too talented to refuse recognition. The mansion glowed under the setting sun as Yal handed the PR manager the results and ordered him to leak the information. Reporters swarmed Jun calm and composed. He said he had studied with private tutors for a year and that the cost of his education could cover journalists' salaries for 10 years. His father lowered his head in silence. His mother looked uneasy. Jun crossed his arms and asked the reporters a simple question. Did they really believe the grandson of the richest man in the country sat alone grinding textbooks? When they mentioned the student who placed first, a boy from Jeju Island, Jun suggested they go interview him instead. Articles about Jun, he said, should please his grandfather, nothing more. By the end of 1996, champagne flowed at the Sang Hotel. Relatives congratulated Jun, calling him a future prosecutor general. Jun calmly corrected them. Prosecutors are appointed by presidents. He planned to become a corporate mergers and acquisitions lawyer. Yanam, watching closely, realized Jun wasn't trying to compete with him anymore. That made him dangerous. Later that night, Yanam offered to take Jun somewhere fun. The car drove into a private villa. An employee rushed forward, apologizing. Yanam exploded, striking him for failing to bring a popular actress. Jun watched silently, reminded of scenes from his past life. When Jun told Yanam to stop, the room froze. Yanam forced a smile, dismissed the employee, and pretended nothing happened. Jun saw through it. Power made people ugly when no one was watching. Over drinks, Yanam spoke about loyalty. Employees, he said, only pretend to be loyal. Blood relatives are different. Brothers share everything. Jun drank quietly, knowing the truth. In his past life, this same cousin sent his own brother to prison over money. Loyalty didn't exist here. Only timing did. The man looked at his cousin kindly, smiled, and said he didn't care whether Jun became a prosecutor or a lawyer. Jun looked at him in surprise. Yanam grinned and said that if Jun stood on his side and helped him, he would make him the second most powerful person in the entire corporation. Jun pressed his lips together and studied his cousin carefully. Yanam closed his eyes, shook his head, and said Jun was the only person in the family with real potential. Everyone else was incompetent. Even if they magically matured overnight, they still lacked what it took to run a business. Jun stared at him silently as Yanam continued, saying Jun was different and that someone with his brain should be used properly. Jun narrowed his eyes. He wasn't sure if Yanam was trying to control him or genuinely wanted him as an advisor. Before he could answer, someone called Yanam's name. Two women stood at the doorway, smiling, one of them waving and joking that it felt like forever since their last meeting. Yanam greeted them cheerfully. Jun recognized them instantly. Celebrities, the kind you see on TV every weekend. Jun stood up, apologized for leaving early, said he was tired and wished them a good time. Yanam didn't stop him. Jun stepped onto the porch, loosened his tie, inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly. His indifferent expression returned. It was the first time he had really drunk alcohol since his rebirth, and he had nearly overdone it. The cold night air helped. The driver was asleep in the car, a faint bruise still visible on his face. Jun studied him through the glass. When Jun got in, the man woke up in panic, apologizing repeatedly. Jun told him it was fine and apologized instead for making him wait. As the car drove off, Jun rested his head on his hand and asked if the man worked in the strategic planning office. The driver stiffened in shock. Jun calmly explained there were two groups there: elite families who actually planned strategy and the others who ran errands and cleaned up messes. Jun said the driver belonged to the second group. The man's grip tightened on the wheel. Jun told him quietly that he understood that humiliation because he had lived that life once too. Then Jun smiled and said something unexpected. The driver was luckier than those so-called elites. Jun explained that his grandfather was nearly 80. When he was gone, the chairman's children would tear each other apart like animals fighting over meat. Information would become more valuable than loyalty. People would pay fortunes for secrets. In the long run, someone like the driver could make far more money than the polished fools upstairs. The driver demanded to know why Jun was telling him this. Jun replied calmly that he wasn't his employee, but some truths were worth hearing. Then he closed his eyes, told the man to wake him when they arrived, and casually called him bro. The city lights passed outside as Jun imagined the future. 1997, the steel company collapsed, banks panicked, corporations circled like predators, a feeding frenzy was coming. CEO Yang Chao stared at the paper in his hand, disbelief tightening his face, and quietly repeated the number, 2.37 trillion won. He looked up at the room and asked if the data was correct, but the executives avoided his eyes and stayed silent. His voice sharpened as he demanded an answer, and Yang Gi, adjusting his glasses, finally confirmed that every figure was accurate. Yang Chao looked back at the paper and said that if this was true, then Dehan Group would open bidding around that amount. He added that Dehan had far more experience in steel than Siang, meaning the real question was where they should even start bidding. The room stayed silent, heads lowered, until Yang Chao turned sharply toward his grandson and asked what he thought. Yang Jun met his gaze and answered without hesitation, 1.8 trillion won. Yang Chao's eyes widened as he demanded an explanation, and Yang Jun calmly replied that this was the absolute maximum they could afford. Yang Chao leaned back and said bluntly that if that was the case, then Dehan would win. Yang Jun spread his hands and said there was no point burning everything, because if this became a contest of money alone, they had no chance. Yang Chao tapped his cheek and reminded him this was an open auction, asking what exactly he was proposing. Yang Jun replied that they should emphasize how Siang acquiring hand steel would benefit the entire economy. He pointed out that Dehan already owned a similar plant, so acquiring another wouldn't change much. Yang Gi watched him closely as Yang Chao crossed his arms and ordered a report explaining the economic impact of Siang's purchase. He stressed that it needed to be written well enough to move people's hearts and gave them 1 week. Then he asked if everyone agreed on 1.8 trillion, or if anyone had another idea. A voice suggested 2.5 trillion won. Yang shot the speaker a hostile look as Yang Chao calmly asked him to explain. The man introduced himself as Zhang Chao, president of Siang Construction, and said the consortium didn't care who acquired hand steel. The government would support whoever won, meaning they would need to pay more to avoid controversy. When Yang Chao asked where the extra money would come from, Zhang Chao waved it off, saying they could use land slated for apartments as collateral and borrow 700 billion won. Yang Chao frowned and asked how they planned to repay that loan without selling apartments. Zhang Chao narrowed his eyes and said he would resolve everything during construction, so the chairman had nothing to worry about. Yang Chao studied him and realized this answer came closest to reality. Zhang Chao had offered a solution and taken full responsibility, leaving the chairman clean if things went wrong. Smiling slightly, Yang Chao joked about how casually Zhang Chao talked about 700 billion, asking how much he'd already embezzled. Zhang Chao hurriedly denied it as the meeting dissolved. Later, reviewing documents, Yang Chao said Dehan was expected to bid 3 trillion won, and scoffed that their CEO wasn't the type to bluff. When asked if he truly planned to invest 2.5 trillion, he questioned why it mattered. The secretary admitted that doing so would limit the fund for some time. Yang Chao smiled and asked Dijun what he thought, finding him calmly reading at the table. Yang Chao asked if simply offering more money was their only option. Dijun smiled and asked for a hint, already knowing his grandfather wasn't easy to read. Closing his eyes, Yang Chao said that if he owned a sapling, he'd sell it to someone who would grow it, not someone who'd cut it down for firewood. Business worked the same way. The secretary broke into a sweat and asked if Dehan really planned to resell the company. Yang Chao replied that it didn't matter, as long as the seller believed that story. Dijun finally spoke, explaining that Dehan would build apartments on the land, sell the equipment overseas, and erase the company quietly. If Siang acquired it, they would at least appear to restore it. Yang Chao smiled, saying he might have given too obvious a hint. Dijun considered Dehan's connections and realized approval wouldn't be difficult if dismantling was the plan. When asked how much he intended to invest, Yang Chao admitted that 1.8 trillion was the limit. Haki warned that the 500 billion gap was massive. Yang Chao closed his eyes and said all they needed was to plant seeds, and he'd turn them into rumors. Dijun immediately understood, imagining headlines, protests, and pressure. Yang Chao ordered him to closely observe how he used government allies. Then his tone softened, reminding Dijun that orientation started tomorrow and advising him to build loyalty early. Dijun closed his book, said he understood, and was told a capable man was waiting outside to follow his instructions. Smiling, he thanked his grandfather and headed out. Outside, lights still burned in the windows as a man by the car bowed and handed him a card. He introduced himself as Yunyo, assistant head of group strategy, and offered him a ride home. The car moved through the streets as Dijun stared out the window. When he asked who had assigned Yunyo, assuming the vice chairman, Yunyo replied that it was Chief Haki. Dijun pictured Haki, his grandfather's closest aide, and asked who the reports would go to. Yunyo said everything went directly to Haki. Dijun smiled and told him to report everything exactly as it happened, since following Haki's orders was his job. Yunyo stayed silent as the car continued forward. As sunlight hit the brick cottages, Dijun mentioned hand steel again, saying he hoped they'd get involved. Sean frowned, saying it wasn't really their game. Sean explained that even if they acquired it, liquidation was inevitable and selling would take years. Dijun smiled and said that wasn't the goal. He wasn't trying to buy it, just raise the stakes and leave. Sean frowned harder, warning him about the clash between Di-han and Sang. Di-jun looked at him and said plainly that he was helping his grandfather and wanted Siang to win. Sean sighed, reminding him that as CEO, he had to obey the main shareholder. He then asked the real question, "What exactly do you want?" The answer aired on the news instead of in words. An American investment fund announced it had entered the race, offering 2.5 trillion won for hand steel. Standing before reporters, Sean leaned forward calmly, saying companies come and go and steel mills aren't sentimental assets. His fund had calculated the value and was confident it would win. When asked what fantasy investment would do if they succeeded, Sean replied without hesitation that they were investors, not builders. The plant would be sold to someone more capable, and the land would go to construction. A reporter asked whether this was speculation despite the risk. Sean took a sip of water and said that wasn't the right word, adding that the bank should simply choose the highest bidder, especially when even banks were vulnerable. The screen went dark as someone threw the remote onto the table. Hack closed his eyes, rubbing his temple, saying interference without consequences wasn't acceptable. Sean narrowed his eyes, irritated that such a trivial issue had forced an early meeting. The man snapped back, pointing out that this little performance had clearly shaken someone they both knew. Yonel trembled with anger, ordering the secretary to bring Sean in immediately. Sean stood up calmly, saying the chairman should re-watch the interview, because he and his grandson had thought this through carefully. He admitted Siang would gain an advantage and might spend more than planned, but now the consortium would be easier to convince. With that, he excused himself, heading to a creditors' meeting. When the door closed, the secretary froze, finally realizing which grandson Sean meant. Hackey tilted his head, understanding that this intervention could shift public opinion exactly where they needed it. He laughed at himself for missing it earlier just as the phone rang. Chairman Yang Chao said he'd reconsidered, and that Sean's interference could be useful after all. Hackey confirmed that he'd spoken with the fund's head and that it was Di-jun's idea, even if Sean refined the execution. Yang Chao was stunned, then laughed, realizing his grandson had pulled an American investment fund into his corner, explaining that tomorrow the media attack would begin, harsh articles criticizing fantasy investment. He planned to flood television discussions with economics professors emphasizing that Di-han already owned a steel mill. The narrative would be simple: Di-han didn't need hand steel to run it, only to strip the land. Hackey smiled, confident this would poison public opinion. Yang Chao praised his timing as perfect. Di-jun walked in with his hands in his pockets, noticing the banners, beer bottles, and long tables packed with people. He paused at the entrance as heads turned, some whispering about his looks, before taking a seat among food and drinks. He smiled, thinking that without knowing the future, this would feel painfully awkward. A student council member welcomed everyone, followed by law professors. Then freshman introductions began. One student shouted his name proudly, another declared himself the future guardian of justice. Di-jun listened with a grin as applause echoed. When the microphone reached him, the room fell silent. He asked for a little extra time, bowed politely, and introduced himself as Di-jun, joking that he should probably thank his rich grandfather for getting in. Some laughed, others didn't, because they knew money alone couldn't buy admission here. Still smiling, he said he wasn't good at making friends, so he preferred gifts. He asked if gifts counted as bribery. The answer came calmly: friendship was too abstract to count. He followed up by asking about professors, earning laughter when one admitted grades were much more concrete. That's when the doors opened. Men in black suits rolled in boxes as murmurs spread. Di-jun smiled and said his grandfather taught him that gifts should exceed expectations. Boxes were handed out, revealing brand new laptops. No one was listening anymore. Later, sitting beside his grandfather, Di-jun casually calculated the cost, around 600 million won. Yang Chao stared at him in disbelief. Dijun smiled and said every one of those students would now be on his side, and that it doubled as perfect product promotion. When told student popularity wasn't enough, Dijun said this was only the beginning. He explained discounts, campus ads, and prestige branding. Yang Chao sipped his tea, considering it. Dijun warned that if his grandfather wasn't interested, he could handle the expense himself. Yang Chao snapped at him not to make him look like a stingy old man. After calming down, Yang Chao asked why only 200 laptops were prepared when there were 400 law students. Dijun smiled and explained that only half usually showed up for orientation. He said it was fair to reward initiative. Yang Chao laughed, slapping his knee, saying it was far easier to motivate people by rewarding them openly. Students sat around chatting. Someone hugged his laptop box and joked that it would be his teddy bear for the night. Some had already unboxed theirs and were exploring it. Someone slipped him a folded note. Yunio whispered that these were the names of students who refused the gift. Dijun smiled, thinking those people would need closer attention. Campus life moved on as April warmed the air. Dijun chatted with classmates, quickly forming a small circle of close associates. In class, students greeted him warmly. One joked that the laptop was so good he couldn't study anymore. Dijun laughed and said that was part of the plan, distracting his rivals. A few students without laptops watched him carefully, sweat running down their faces. Dijun noticed their stares and briefly wondered if another distribution in May would be necessary. At the coffee machine, Dijun watched a student with glasses who had refused the laptop. He dropped a coin into the machine and casually asked if the guy had attended orientation. The student snapped back, saying Dijun couldn't expect gratitude. Dijun smiled and said he never expected it, assuming the refusal came from pride. Accused him of showing off his wealth in front of professors. Dijun calmly asked whether refusing a free lunch or coffee would also count as pride. The student argued it wasn't the same. Dijun replied that it was exactly the same, only scaled differently. He explained that while others counted money in thousands, he counted in millions and billions. For him, a laptop and a coffee cost roughly the same. The student clenched his fists in rage. Dijun added that people happily accept small favors but suddenly discover pride when the gift is expensive. He tossed his cup into the trash and walked away, leaving the student watching silently. Later, sitting on a bench under the sun, Dijun listened to his friends and rubbed his neck, disappointed that every student who refused the gift reacted the same way. As he stood, a fair-haired guy in a tracksuit approached him and bluntly said that even if seniors claimed it wasn't a bribe, that was exactly what it was. Dijun's eyes widened in surprise because this man's name was also on the list. He asked calmly why he thought it was a bribe, and the student sat beside him on the bench, explaining that bribes are paid in advance while gifts are given as thanks for services already rendered. Dijun reminded him that he wasn't a government official and hadn't been asked for anything. The student smiled and said bribes are often given years before the favor is ever requested. Dijun narrowed his eyes, snorted softly, and watched a bead of sweat roll down the man's face. The student asked whether his grandfather taught him tricks like this. Dijun replied that being the youngest meant the chairman rarely paid attention to him, but his older cousins taught him plenty of useful things. The fair-haired guy studied him and suggested that Dijun must be the least successful member of the Siang group family. Dijun didn't argue, smiling as he said his father, the chairman's youngest son, had been expelled long ago and now produced films. Scratching his head, the student admitted he should have taken the laptop. Dijun thought the guy was oddly amusing. The student asked whether he could still get one or if it was too late. Dijun realized he didn't really want it and was just being polite, which made him smile. He asked if the guy was older than most freshmen. The student bristled, said he didn't look that old, and accused Dijun of insulting him. Dijun offered the laptop as an apology. The student stood, brushed himself off and said maybe someday, then walked away. Dijun called after him, reminding him he never answered the age question. The student raised a hand in an obscene gesture and told him to shut up. Nearby, Dijun noticed a girl chatting quietly with someone. She looked familiar, and his friend adjusted his glasses, warning him not to try anything. He realized he hadn't seen her at orientation and learned she'd quietly left during the laptop chaos. Dijun smiled, suddenly stood up and walked over. The girl noticed him approaching and looked up curiously. Dijun said he was curious why she didn't take the laptop gift. She smiled, closed her eyes, and said she didn't know how to use it, wondering what the point was of accepting something useless to her. Dijun looked down awkwardly, realizing he'd never considered that reason. She teased him gently, saying his stare made her heart flutter. Dijun blushed despite himself. Elsewhere, Yangchao crossed his arms as a woman joked about finally finding someone normal. She quickly corrected herself, saying this was the future chairman's match. She laid out 3 candidates, including the daughter of the president of Deal Bank, a Princeton graduate working in Hong Kong. Yangchao studied the photos silently. She explained that another candidate was the granddaughter of the Hansung newspaper chairman. Yangchao told her to arrange meetings with all 3. He warned her not to let rumors spread about choosing a bride like shopping. She protested that finding candidates at this level wasn't easy. For your grandson Dajun, she mentioned the final candidate, the granddaughter of a constitutional court appointee from a powerful legal family. Yangchao grew thoughtful as she added that the girl studied at the same university as his grandson. The woman smiled, saying she'd arrange everything naturally so it felt like fate. Yangchao told her to begin. Later Yongjin learned he'd be meeting candidates the next day. He frowned, realizing marriage wasn't something he could influence. Yonggi explained calmly that marriage was the best form of collateral and security. Yongjin clenched his teeth, understanding the logic even if he hated it. In class, a professor announced a new group assignment based on controversial public incidents. Students groaned as groups of 5 were assigned. Dijun scanned the list and froze when he saw Mian's name in his group. They exchanged brief looks before class began. He quietly handed the paper to Assistant Kim, asking him to look into 2 names. Kim asked if he should report it to Haki. Dijun told him it was his choice. Kim agreed, clearly testing boundaries. Later, news played showing bids for hand steel. When Sang Group was announced as the winner, Yangchao simply smiled. Others celebrated, relieved they hadn't lost much. Someone complained about fantasy investment making them look like villains. Chao replied that this was better, since it gave judges a reason to exclude them. Investigations into the fund revealed nothing obvious, though its CEO being Korean raised questions. Yangchao ordered them to uncover the investor's identity quickly. The man nodded calmly, promising it would be done. Yonel grinned and said it was time to start the game. A folder landed on the table, showing what would have happened in 1991 if the corruption had never been reported. Another folder followed, revealing that Ain Motors would have been absorbed into Siang Motors. The documents explained Chairman Jin's original strategy, restructuring the domestic auto industry with full government support. Yonel remarked calmly that Sang had simply been unlucky. They had the plan, but history chose someone else. He smirked and imagined the man who had wanted Ain Motors for years, probably tearing his hair out watching it slip away again, maybe even losing his mind over it. Then Yonel smiled wider, pointing out that all the money the old man had scraped together and borrowed was now tied up in buying a steel mill. Laughter spread across the room. Yonel ended it firmly, ordering everyone to begin tomorrow. Elsewhere, a man holding a mug asked what Chairman Hong had been up to, nodding that several days had passed since the official meeting. Hong smiled and congratulated him on acquiring hand steel. The man closed his eyes and asked if congratulations were really necessary, since the vice chairman and Yongan had handled everything. Hong lowered his head and added that he'd heard the chairman had recently studied business abroad and already taken on something this big. Then Hong hesitated and reported that strange rumors were spreading. News about Ain Motors had suddenly started appearing again, exactly like 6 years ago. The gray-haired man froze and slammed his mug down. Curious what happens next? Tap that cheeky bell, subscribe, like, and share.